this would probably be reading the text. There are some types of lichens and fungus growing that have a bread-like texture to it that conceivably could have been used. But I rather the plain sense was the most logical thing. He somehow supplied bread. Maybe there was somebody who was making bread and they had an abundance of bread. I don't know. Because remember, Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes, so he multiplied bread and fish when he fed the multitudes. So somehow or another, God, supplied the need. But it was a miracle.
If he could get the ravens to deliver it, he could get the bread from wherever he needed to or wanted to.
Yeah. So, however God chose to supply it, potentially it could have been like the manna in a sense, which would have been like a little wafer. So, yeah.
In history, there was a famous statement that someone was ridiculed for. It was Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake," and there was no bread.
Right.
And she got ridiculed for that.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the statement was somewhat taken out of context because Marie Antoinette is portrayed in history as being out of touch through that statement, but she actually was more trying to help the people, and I think it was something like they had food in the palace, and she was saying, well, let them eat that, meaning that the cakes and stuff that we have here, these people are starving and we have it, they should be taking it out to them. But see, history has not been kind to her, partly because the victors write the story and the monarchy was destroyed, toppled, and the people who followed didn't want them to look like they cared. So in some respects, Marie Antoinette and her husband were much better for the people than the people who followed them with the French Revolution. Yeah, in fact, the Robespierre, the guy that was one of the pushers of the French Revolution, actually was consumed by his own revolution and also was guillotined.
It really draws a little parallel with the American Revolution.
Yeah, because they're totally opposite, because the French Revolution was based on the idea man is basically good, needs to be freed from the constraints of oppression and everything to produce his goodness. Whereas the American Revolution was man, it was Bible based. Man is essentially evil at heart, and we need something to restrain us. See, that the Bible talks about the heart is desperately wicked. We have a sin nature. The French rejected the Bible. It was based on atheism. And they said, this idea of man basically being evil, the church uses that to keep people under control. Well, that may have been an element of truth there, because it did control people when people believed that.
Sometimes people need to be.
Yeah, people do need control, because if you're not controlled from within by a sense of right and wrong, or by a sense of a deity that's watching you and is going to hold you accountable, you have to be controlled from without by laws and
dictator.
And ultimately a dictator, but laws or something from without has to control you. And so when the French Revolution said, if man is freed from constraints, he will exhibit his innate goodness. Well, what did we see in the French Revolution? It quickly descended into chaos, mobocracy, and general wickedness, and became a very frightening place to be. If you live during the time of the American Revolution in the colonies, your biggest fear was the British military coming in and taking over your house or something. You didn't worry that you were about to be overrun by everybody. Your neighbors are going to be, the problem. But if you lived revolution, you worried about everybody, including your own family. You were worried somebody would turn you in for the least little thing, and it happened. Least little thing, people were turned in and executed. the river there in Paris, just ran red with blood practically because of the executions that took place. And so it was a very, very wicked thing. If you ever read anything, if you want to read a good book that describes the conditions of the French Revolution, Ann Coulter, probably about 10, 15 years ago, wrote a book called Mobocracy. And she goes through a detailed history and account of the French Revolution. And, the whole thing was started with a false premise, and it just went on from there. There were a handful of people that used it to essentially, they didn't like who was in power. They wanted to be in power. And of course, it ended up turning on some of them, like Robespierre, who ended up getting the guillotine himself. And the guillotine was invented actually as a way to enable them to execute more people more efficiently,
And the
more
guy-
quickly.
The guy who invented it was slain by the guillotine.
Yeah, even him. Yeah, the inventor. And it's interesting because the Bible indicates in Revelation that during the tribulation, those that do not follow the Antichrist and his rule will also meet the guillotine or something like it. They'll be beheaded for the cause of Christ. So it is, French Revolution is a perfect example of what happens when you don't realize and act according to what man's nature really is. And so man's nature has to be restrained. I forget which one of the founding fathers said it. They said something to the effect of, if men were angels, there'd be no need for laws. And of course, he wasn't talking about the fallen angels, talking about the holy angels. And unfortunately, we're not. We have a sin nature. And that's one of the geniuses of the American Revolution, especially when it came time to put together the Constitution for our form of government. The Constitution was put together, with the Bible, the Old Testament in particular, being the most quoted and referenced book that the founders used in putting together our Constitution. There were other things they used, of course, as well. But one of the thoughts was the division of powers, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branches. The reason is because they believe that man had a sin nature. They feared putting all power into the hands of one branch or one person who would oversee the entire government. And that's why we've been able to be as free as we have been for as long as we have been.
Restraint.
There's restraint, checks and balances. And over the years, though, some of the checks and balances have been eroded away or ignored. And so we see some of the problems that we're having today, obviously. But so it's from Elijah there and the Ravens to the French Revolution. But yes, go ahead.
Another follow-up is, because the World Economic Forum, there's an article here about how they want us to let them eat bugs.
Yes, crickets for all. Crickets for all. It's, in fact, if you buy snacks from Canada and if you check the label, you may see that it's made from crickets. That cracker like this is rice. This is rice flour, but they dry the crickets and powder it and use it like as a flour. It's high in protein. I mean, it is edible, but the idea of a cricket burger to me isn't nearly as appealing as a beef burger.
Jiminy Cricket.
Jiminy Cricket, Jiminy Cricket's on the list. He doesn't want to go to Canada, but part of that reason is that they want to get rid of farms, because farms are a threat to world, global government. People who run farms can be independent. Crickets aren't grown on, you don't have a cricket ranch out there. You got people out there herding crickets around with tiny little toothpicks with a little piece of metal on the end to brand their crickets. Roundup time. The crickets are grown in. Have you ever seen where they have them like in pet stores? raise them, you can buy things that you raise crickets in. So they would be produced in like a factory or a warehouse. And it's all going to be controlled by central authorities. So that's why you have to get rid of the family farms, because they're a threat. You know, cow burps and such not, you know, even though, you know, they've been passing gas as long as there's been cattle on the earth. And even though water vapor is a much, much greater global warming gas than any other gas.
Yeah, they never wanted to take into account the sun.
No, sun has nothing to do with heating the earth. Nothing at all. Yeah, right. So.
And lobsters too. There's
Yeah. No, that's that they just had in the White House is a lobster. Yeah.
They spotted the type of whale that they're saying is getting caught on one
On the line. Yeah. Well, you know,
one single line going down to the trap.
this is the invisible whale.
Yeah.
Did you know that lobster in the 1700s and early 1800s was considered a junk food? They gave them to prisoners in New England, and law saying it's cruel and inhuman to feed prisoners lobster. How we've come. Lobsters went from being cruel and unusual punishment to a. Yeah, it would be in the Bible, because the lobster is a scavenger. And if you look at the unclean foods, like we said with the raven, most of the and things in the Bible that were declared to be unclean were scavengers. The raven, the eagle, the vulture, because hawks and eagles will eat dead things just like a vulture will, or a buzzard.
Any
Catfish would be considered unclean because they have no scales. Yeah, and crustaceans, crabs, lobsters. Well, and the shellfish, when you get into them, they're all bottom feeders. They filter waste out of the water, and that's what they eat. Crayfish, if you ever eat crayfish, they're all scavengers. Pigs are scavengers. Pigs will eat anything. So scavengers basically, and there's good biological reason for that, because poisons in the food chain get concentrated the further up you go. For instance, if grass grows somewhere and it picks up some chemicals that are not healthy or even toxic, it's in the soil, it gets into the grass. Lead, for example. Remember before you had, when we had lead, grass growing alongside the roadside where a lot of traffic went by would have lead in it. So a cow or a goat or a sheep or something eats that grass. The grass, the amount of lead in the grass is concentrated compared to what's in the soil around it. When the sheep or whatever eats the grass, concentrated than it is in the grass. And then if something eats that, then it's more concentrated in that. Every up, it becomes more concentrated. And so when a scavenger comes, say that you had a rabbit, I'll make it a rabbit to make it easier. The grass concentrates the lead in the grass. The rabbit concentrates the lead in the rabbit flesh. The hawk comes down and catches the rabbit and eats the rabbit. Now the lead is concentrated even more in the hawk that ate the rabbit. The hawk dies, and the scavenger comes along and starts eating that. The lead is concentrated in the flesh of that scavenger. So then let's say the scavenger waited even more, because every step up the way, it's concentrated. Of the clean animals, by and large, were herbivores, animals that ate basically plants, because you had the lowest level of concentration of heavy metals or whatever pollutants might get into the soil. a lot less when you're eating the herbivores that eat the grass rather than eating the carnivores and the scavengers that are separate. So almost like God knew what he was doing. He said, don't eat those things. Yes.
When people were living a lot longer, wouldn't it have been even more of a big deal because you're more time for those things to build up?
Well, it would be. However, those constraints came in when lifespans were already shortened considerably. So obviously, the longer you live, because your body does store some pollutants, for instance, I believe will be stored is it in the fat?
Mercury.
Yeah, mercury and mercury is a good example too, because it's not as bad now, but remember back in the 70s, because the amount of mercury that you get in a fish, tuna really is not a first line consumer. Tuna eats other fish. So the other fish eat plankton, which is like eating grass, and the plankton get mercury in them. And then the other fish eat the plankton, they get concentrated in them. And then another fish eats them, it gets concentrated. Then the tuna eats them, because some tuna are pretty big fish. And they eat these other fish, and the mercury gets concentrated in them. Walleye in Lake Erie, has they eat other fish, and so you get a concentration of the heavy metals in those other fish, the fish that eat them. And so, as a consequence, when you eat a can of tuna fish, it's not as bad now, but you're eating more lead than what you might think. And the problem is, it's more of a metabolic form, because it's in the flesh of the fish. So it's more likely to be taken in. You can play with mercury. We used to when we were in school. Today, if a drop of mercury, remember when we were kids, I think you're not feeling good. Let me check temperature.
Yeah.
It was a mercury thermometer. If you break one of those today, if you could find one, and a drop of mercury comes on here, they want to bring a hazmat team in here and cordon the whole place off. And I remember bringing home a bottle of mercury from the school because we were doing something, and going like this. My dad said when he was a kid, they would take mercury and rub a penny in it so it would look like a nickel, and try to get away with it. It's just what they do. The liquid mercury doesn't really, unless you got an open sore or something like that, doesn't get absorbed into your body.
How many kids used to bite on pencils?
Well, yeah, but that's carbon in there, though. What I was going to say with the mercury, then for some reason, the same people who said that a drop of mercury is going to kill you insisted that we had the Curly Q bulbs, remember, with mercury vapor in there. The mercury vapor is far more hazardous to you than the liquid mercury. And if you ever read on one of those Curly Q bulbs, it says if you break this, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to evacuate, open the windows, even if it's a dead of winter, for at least 20 minutes and let the place air out, because it's mercury vapor, which is far worse for you than liquid mercury. But they insisted that we couldn't have incandescent bulbs because it's bad for the environment. You got to have these mercury vapor things in your house. And when you
Well, it's
break one of
okay if
them,
they
you can
kill
hear them
you.
hiss.
It's okay if you die.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah.
Get rid of it.
So we can't have a mercury thermometer. That's
So are those the LED you're talking about?
no, they were the little Curly Q ones. They look like a spiral,
Oh, yeah, I never-
like a little fluorescent almost.
You wonder how safe LEDs are.
Well, LEDs don't have any of that.
Okay.
And LED, there could be some problems with some people on wavelengths of light, but in terms of, hey, Neil, you back there? An LED, they don't give off anything, do they? Other than a tiny amount of, not even much heat, do they? Just a little bit of heat. There's no gas in them. It's just a little, it's wires and plastic and silicon.
Dangerous thing is if you ground it up and ate it. So don't grind them up and eat it.
Yeah, don't grind up, don't chew on your LED lights. This is a warning. Do not chew your LED.
Other than that, they're perfectly safe.
Yeah. Like the,
Now you tell me.
now, sorry.
Like he said, remember the Mad Hatter?
Yeah.
Passed
Well,
the-
yeah, and that's why I remember the Mad Hatter, because
Mercury and.
they use mercury to stiffen the felt on the hat. And over time, they would get too much mercury vapor inhaled and they would get mad. It would lead to, it wasn't a hatter by chance. It was a hatter because they were known for going mad. Women's hat fashions over time, I suppose, but it's a whole other thing.
In that process?
Probably, but formaldehyde is much less poisonous than mercury vapor. In fact, formaldehyde in some senses is less poisonous than alcohol. But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
About current events. So, the other day, I think it was the House, no, the Senate.
Mhm.
The Senate, aren't they moving?
The
Mike Lee has introduced an amended bill.
there was on Tuesday.
The amendment was
Yeah.
defeated.
On Tuesday, there was a vote on House Resolution 8404, which is the Defense of Marriage Act. It's really the Indefensible Marriage Act. Or respect, I'm sorry, yeah, you're right. Respect of marriage. It's Respect for Marriage Act. Here's what it is. Basically, it's a bill which repeals portions of the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, now, on the face of it, it carves out protection that object to hosting same-sex weddings. However, it allows for litigation, which is going to open the floodgates. It's like Merry Christmas to all the lawyers out there, because now the floodgates are going to be open once this bill is passed and signed into law, which apparently it will.
They gotta get through the House?
It's already been through the House.
They're
It went to the Senate. 12
There's not enough
Republicans.
in the House.
12 Republicans in the Senate voted for it. It's got to go back to the House because they put a really vague sort of protection amendment in there for religious views.
Yeah,
And it amounts to nothing.
including our own Rob Portman.
Yeah, Portman, we knew would vote for it. But two that are troubling is Senator Blunt and Senator, was it Ernst? Or what was her name?
One for Maine?
No. From Iowa, I think.
Yeah.
I had a list here somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. These are two people who have been defenders of marriage and they voted for it. I had something that had them on here, but I can't find it.
Yeah,
right at the moment.
Joni Ernst.
Joni Ernst. And was it Ray Blunt or something? What's bad about this, they pushed it through right now because what are most Christians and things doing right now? All our focus is on Christmas is coming. Many churches that observe Advent, they're focused on that because it's Advent season. Churches are focused on Christmas plays, Christmas programs, Christmas this, Christmas that. Even the Jewish people that might otherwise weigh in are focused on Hanukkah and a number of things there. And so by putting this thing through, bringing it through now, a lot of people are simply not paying attention because they're focused on so many other things right now. And even people who aren't focused on church programs are focused on holiday parties, gift shopping and all that sort of stuff. And when you get to December, people in the news media know that most of America is not focused on the news. They really aren't. Everybody's focused on Christmas, Hanukkah, things like that, not focused on the news. And so by putting this thing through, this thing came through at Thanksgiving time. And so it went to the Senate, and was Senator Lee, and his would prohibit the federal government from discriminating against individuals, organizations, closely held for-profits, like a privately owned for-profit, like say Hobby Lobby, as well as religious based nonprofits and things, and based on their sincerely held religious beliefs or moral convictions about marriage, as to whether or not they support marriage between one man, one woman, or same-sex marriage. So this amendment would restrict the federal government for purposes of licensing, tax-exempt status, contracts, benefits, and things. This was a good amendment, which would have provided some real protection for people of faith. This was voted down. The Lankford Amendment, and not quite as strong, but also really quite good, doing much of the same thing. And it also prohibits people under the color of state law and on any government entities, states, territories, possessions, Indian tribes, to ensure that governmental actors who contract with the state welfare agencies are not harmed by the bill. This is a good, because there's some faith-based, as he said, child welfare agencies, like adoption agencies, that are being told, well, if you will not place a child in a same-sex marriage home, you cannot participate in our programs. And the government will not let them have any participation for helping adopt kids and take care of kids and things. This would have protected that. And there's some other protections it had. This was voted down. Then there was the Rubio Amendment, which was much shorter, basically would have taken away the right of private action, which this bill has. The private action is if two people, same sex, want to get married, and they go to, I'll make Tom, since he brought this up, owner of Tom's Banquet Hall. So Tom's Banquet Hall. And he says, we cater to Christians so that you can have a banquet, a party, a reception in a Christian environment. And then and says, we want to rent your banquet. Rightly, wait a minute, this is a Christian themed banquet hall. We only host Christian themed events here. And, a same-sex marriage goes against our very principles and beliefs. And they say, oh, you have disrespected us. Here's your summons. You're being sued. Now, Tom may very well win in court, but what will the cost be? He's going to be drugged through the mud, because the media, of course, will, this narrow-minded, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see what they would do? So you're drugged through the mud. You've got to take time out of your schedule to go to court, meet with lawyers, and lawyers don't come cheap, do they? And now you got to pay them, and the suit, even if you win, may end up putting you out of business. And these people know that. Look what they've done to the baker, the Christian baker out in Colorado. I want you to make a cake for our same-sex wedding. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I just really don't feel comfortable. Why don't you go across the street? They're good bakers too. They'd be happy to help you out. No, we want you. We're going to sue you and make you do it. Now, I don't know if I force somebody to make me a cake. I would want somebody that's, with me, and wants to do the best job they could.
I mean, there were plenty of gay bakers they could have.
Oh, absolutely. But they targeted him purposefully and they sued him and he was drugged through the, and he had to, I mean, he was about bankrupted. Eventually he was exonerated and he was okay and everything was fine. And so they tried it again with the same guy. I don't know how many times he's been sued for similar things. They keep, huh? Yeah, trans thing, but they're purposely doing it. And if people don't think that this is going to open the doors for them to do the same thing, because according to this resolution, if it becomes law, if somebody thinks they're being disrespected, if somebody thinks that, you know, I don't think Joe is approving of my same-sex marriage. Court the litigation, private right. You can sue, you feel, and you're free to defend yourself, but at what cost? See, back when Ohio was considering, and we went through about 2 or 3 times trying to pass what was called Pastors Protection Act in Ohio. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a similar one coming down the pike. Nobody in the state house right now is willing to try it. That could change, but the Pastors Protection Act was put forward because of the Obergefell decision, where the Supreme Court said you can't have a law against same-sex marriage. It's not constitutional is what they were saying. That didn't say that you have to have a law. It just said you can't legislate against it. And this amendment will say it's now legal. Same-sex marriages are legal in the United States. So the Pastors Protection Act would have said nonprofit are allowing this. Well, the left and the homosexual mafia, the pink mafia in the state, concentrated their efforts on all of the politicians who were supportive, and basically said, any of you that vote for this, we will mobilize all our resources to defeat you in your district. This is some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Not everybody that goes to Columbus is strong enough to stand for it. We had a Speaker of the House. If anybody remembers the guy that was, what's his name? We have Cupp that's there now. He is out at the end of the term. It began with an H. What's his name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Householder. Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. Just couldn't get it out. Before Householder, remember, we had Householder and the guy before him were both basically, who was Speaker of the House, was very much against the Pastors Protection Act. The reason was he was homosexual, even though he was the Republican head of the Republican majority. There was one in particular, Representative Nino Vitale, who's from down southwestern part of the state, and pushing for this bill and wouldn't back down. Locked out of his, first thing they did is they took away his privileges in the House library, which, you know, they use for research on bills. He was denied privileges there. Then he was locked out of his office.
Out in the yard.
Yeah, put his desk out on the street basically, and wouldn't let him park in the parking area where the representatives and senators do, because he went against the desire of the Speaker of the House, wanted to kill this bill. So you can see why nobody wants to touch it right now. Will there be some efforts? I don't know. I mean, the session ends actually in the middle of December. It's going to end like about the 14th or 15th. Then when they start up again in January, it'll be a new session because we elected new people. We have and same thing with the U.S. House. The U.S. House will start anew in January. Well, So the House will start a new session. There's a greater number of Republicans, and there are a number of good conservatives who got elected. They were basically MAGA types, Tea Party types that ran on those principles, and they got elected. Will they stay with those principles when they get down? To be seen, because we've elected some good people in the past that went down there, and the pressure on them was so great that they waffled and they backed off of the positions that they ran on. So if it goes through, will allow people to file suits. And it'll also allow the federal government to look closely at people who have tax exempt status. Well, you're discriminating against married couples. Well, we don't believe in same-sex marriage. Federal law says, well, we're a faith-based organization. Let me walk you back to the 1970s. Bob Jones University, if anybody's familiar with that, a fundamentalist Christian university in South Carolina. Long-standing from the beginning of the school, they had a policy against dating, and they would not allow interracial to enroll in the school. In the 1970s, the United States government, or in the late 60s, I forget when it was, passed a law saying that interracial marriage in the United States is legal. The United States federal government recognizes interracial marriage. Now they're trying to tie this same-sex marriage to this. This is apples and oranges, because the same-sex marriage is 2 men or 2 women. Interracial marriage was a man and a woman in every completely different thing, but they're tying it in with this. So here's what happened. The federal government saw Bob Jones University and said, hey, you don't allow interracial marriages. You have a tax exempt status. Well, we're a faith-based organization. Yeah, government, and we say interracial marriage is okay. And if you don't agree with us, you can't have your tax exempt status. Bob Jones University, after a great season of prayer, I'm sure, said, guess what? We no longer have a policy against interracial marriage. And it was gone. And it saved the tax exempt status. Let's take the same thing now with the same-sex marriage. Well, let's make it, Bob Smith University. Well, Bob Smith University, we see you have a policy against same-sex marriages. Well, we're a faith-based institution in our beliefs. Well, we're the federal government, and we say it's okay, and we'll take away your tax exempt status if you don't agree. What are some of these schools going to do? Yeah. Now,
Compromise.
in terms of interracial marriage, that was a product of Bob Jones being in the South and coming out of the South and Jim Crow laws and all that, and the old business, because really there's interracial marriages in the Bible. Moses was married to an Ethiopian woman, for instance, at one point, and there's others. But as long as you're a man and a woman, there's no real prohibition in the Bible. People have tried to read it in there, but there really isn't. But there are definitely things in the Bible against a man and a man getting married, or a woman and a woman getting married. But you can bet they'll use the reasoning that they use for interracial marriage, because they're linking them together in the law. And on the basis of what we did there, we'll do it here. And because we're the federal government, and we said we take away your tax exempt status here, we'll take it away. And so how many faith-based organizations are going to suddenly not have a policy against same-sex marriage?
So is it gonna sound
They really,
out of the
they really are faith-based. If they really-
Well,
if they really mean it.
that's it. It's going to find out where the faith is. Are they more concerned with their tax exempt status, or
All right, so the way the law reads now, according to what you've looked at, so we know there's churches that don't entertain this 501c3.
yeah?
and they said, hey, we want to preach the word of God. We're not worried about your tax exemption, right?
Yeah.
Can they still be sued openly?
Well,
for preaching?
that's where the question is with this. The bill on the surface seems to say no, churches can't, but faith-based institutions can.
What about individuals?
Individuals
Writing
can.
books or, huh?
Individuals might be able to.
Yeah.
See, this is where it's a gift for the lawyers, because the law apparently has in it that you have the right to sue people if you feel disrespected in your same-sex marriage.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot
So-
of testing with that.
You now are on the defensive, and the left loves to use things like this to harass and bully people
That's
on
it.
the right.
They want to belittle people into submission.
Exactly. Not only belittle, but scare. Because you saw, wow, look what happened to them. They were drugged through the mud. Because, see, this is what would happen. This was the explanation we had when the Pastors Protection Act was being considered. Said that who said we don't need it, it's redundant. The Ohio Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, they cannot successfully sue you. They'll lose in court. But the problem was they don't have to win in court, because the moment that they file the suit and then the media goes after you, you're to the court of public opinion, and your reputation is destroyed before you ever get to the court.
Right.
And then even if you win in the court, you've spent so much money and your reputation has been ruined that you might as well have lost. You might as well have given in. And a lot of people give in without ever going to court because they know they can't afford to fight it. They know they don't want to be drugged through the public opinion in the mud. And so they'll just give in.
Shakedown.
Yeah, and Jesse Jackson used to do that. Talk about a shakedown. This is how Jesse Jackson made a lot of money. He would go to a major corporation and he would say, you know, I see your company think that it should. You know, we're going to sue dollars. However, if you'll settle out of court, we'll accept, you know, 100,000. 100,000 versus $1 million. It would cost me probably 500,000 or 600,000 to fight the thing, and plus all the public opinion that will go against me. Off. It's a shakedown. He was a shake.
Well, really, is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, it was no different than, you know, the gangsters, remember, who come into the building and say, "Oh, you got a nice place here. It'd be a shame if we had a fire in here." Well, I have fire insurance. Oh, you don't have it through me,
Yeah.
but your rates are a lot higher than them. Yeah, it sure would be a shame, you know, if you had a fire in here. You know, it's shakedown artists. That's what they are. And it pretty much puts it in the law and opens the door for all kinds of that kind of nonsense to go on. They know that that's the case. And they know that a lot of people will just quietly submit because they can't run the risk of the public opinion and they can't afford the litigation costs.
What's really concerning, though, is that, you know, we expect this from the left, the
Mhm.
Democrats, right? But what's really concerning to me is the vast number of Republicans now that are rolling over or compromising. these
Well,
values.
we expected it from Portman because Portman, once his son some years ago came out as homosexual, all of a sudden Portman has never met a gay bill that he doesn't like. So Portman, what was unexpected was Blunt and Ernst. These are people we thought were on our side,
Yeah.
and they voted for it, and that's very disappointing.
The left met their price.
Exactly. Whatever they got, I hope they enjoy it, because it's and again, this is also, and this is what I was saying on the radio today, this is also a direct assault against the image that marriage represents, because in Ephesians chapter 5, I believe it is, it says that the relationship between a man and a woman in marriage is a picture of Christ in the church. This is why the devil attacks it as well. So, and there's another reason too. Another reason is same-sex couples typically don't have children. And it's all a part of lowering the world population down to 500 million.
Children haters.
Yeah, that is
They
true.
really are.
If you increase the number of transgendered people, less people are going to have children. If you increase the number of same-sex marriages, less people are going to have children. And actually, just out of curiosity, if you had to guess the percentage of married couples in the nation that are same-sex marriages, just show of hands, how many people think it's over 20%? Between 10 and 20%. How many, what's the percentage of same-sex marriages out of all marriages in the country? So we had several hands on the 10 to 20%. How about 5 to 10%? Got a few more hands. How about 1 to 5%? How about 1 to 2%? Give me just a second here. Let me find my paper here. According to the latest U.S. Census, less than 1% of American households are headed by same-sex couples. To be specific, same-sex marriage couples consist of only 0.9%.
Wow.
Now, the reason I asked the question of show of hands first is, what's the media making it sound like?
50%.
Yeah,
They're exaggerating it.
exactly. It's less than 1%.
Tail is wagging the dog.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's this is what's happening. They're making you think there are more than what there is. Well, we've got to help these people. Look how many of them there are. It's such a tiny percentage. It's just like with the whole transgender thing. The percentage of people in high schools and colleges across America that are afflicted with gender dysphoria is it's tiny. It's probably less than 1%. Well, it's growing now because everybody thinks that they have it. It's like it's copycat mass hysteria.
My daughter's a teacher
Mhm.
at North Canton Schools, and their graduating class was like 400 students, and they had one trans
1 out of 400.
that they had to accommodate.
So what does that make percentage wise? So he's good at math. 1 out of 100 would be 1%. So 0.25%. 0.25% of the class.
They had to do the bathroom and,
Yeah.
the whole 9
I-
yards.
I sent a thing in to the state on the State Board of Education talking about the Title IX things coming down from the U.S. Department of Education. I had also sent something to them. And I said, if the point that you're trying to achieve is not to offend people, then why are you pushing for doing what will offend the most number of people? Because of that, let's take the school. 0.25% of the student body in that class was trans. And if they're saying I'm just going to say that it's a guy that thinks he's a girl. It could have been the other way, but let's just say that's what it was. I don't know which way, but I'm just saying, just use that way. It's one or the other. So it's a guy that thinks he's a girl. So all of the girls that go into the women's restroom are told, you can't be upset if you find this guy in your restroom. When it comes to gym class, all of the girls that go into the locker room that change or that are involved in sports and they're using the shower and everything, and in comes a guy into the shower in the locker room.
You can't be offended.
You can't be offended because we can't offend this person. You can offend all the others. You can offend 50% of the students, but you can't offend the 0.25% of the students.
And what's sad is that the people who are offended cannot say anything.
Yeah, because then you're a bad person.
Yeah.
So my point was, if your object is to offend the least number of people,
But it ain't.
then yeah, I know, because that's not what the object is. the object is to offend the greatest number of people, because if your object is to offend the least number of people, you would tell the 0.25%, listen, we know you have this belief, but you have to understand most of the ladies here in our school, the young ladies, are not comfortable with you as a male going in, but I'm not, I'm a woman. You don't look like a woman. And you go in here, we're going to give you this room over here you can use. But that's making me less of a woman.
You never will.
Never were, exactly.
But the only reason they have 0.25% is because they convinced him.
Probably.
that he's a girl.
Or her, yeah. And so as a
He didn't come up
consequence,
with it on his own.
we can't offend that person by doing that. So we're going to offend all the girls so that we don't offend this person who has what is documented a medical problem, a mental disorder called gender dysphoria. That's a mental disorder.
And you can go on to win tons of awards.
Yeah.
Swimming and running.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
just using that to destroy society.
Exactly. Joe hit it right there. They're using that to destroy society and also to silence Christians.
It's like a psychological warfare going on.
It is. It is. And so this is what we're facing, and this is what we see in this current administration. They are purposely doing these things. Biden's not up there coming up with this stuff. Somebody else is.
Yeah.
Somebody's coming up with it, and he's the figurehead, such as he is. But yeah, he's. Sometimes I wonder how good of a puppet he is. You know, he wanders off the wrong way. You know, yeah.
Can't find the White House.
Can't find the White House when he's standing in front of it.
Right, that's my favorite.
It's just, it's
Nobody
just.
announced 2 weeks ago, he said, I'm definitely gonna run again. So
I like when he goes off to shake hands and there's nobody there, or when he. Oh, we don't need to. I'm not going to descend into that right now, but there's just so much. It's so rich. But at any rate, we do live in a time where it is, as the Bible says. If you go back to, and you're going to say something, Kim. Go ahead. I'll find my verse here.
Maybe it's what you're gonna look up, as in the days of Noah,
Yeah.
the days of Lot.
Go back to Luke chapter 17. There's where I wanted. Luke chapter 17. And we're in the latter days. I like to say we're in the latter hours, if not in the latter minutes. We don't know how close we are, but I think we're really close, personally. Luke chapter 17. And he's talking about the tribulation and what is going to immediately precede that time. And he says in Luke 17, starting in verse 26, as it was in the days of Noah, and that's N-O-E, that's Noah, but it's coming from the Greek. So it's same as Noah. There's no misspelling or anything there. That's just the way it comes out by the Greek, the Hebrew to the Greek to the English. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Well, what was the characteristic, the overwhelming characteristics of the days of Noah?
they were partying.
Well, but the world was wicked, right?
Yeah,
Wicked and violent.
they were doing what.
The heart was evil, exactly.
They were doing what they wanted to do.
And the other thing was mankind was being systematically destroyed, without getting into all of what transhumanism is. The giants in the land and everything that's talked about in Genesis chapter 6. The devil was systematically trying to destroy the human race to prevent the Messiah from being born.
Yeah, and the evil
So-
wasn't isolated. It
was
consolidated.
worldwide. And this is what we're seeing today. And then look at verse 28. Likewise, also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But in the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So what was, he's got a sign back there. What was the characteristic? They're going to a thing tomorrow down in Columbus where there's a same-sex, drag queen Holly Drag story time, a new family-friendly holiday tradition at the United Universalist Unitarian Church or whatever in Columbus. But at any rate, so what was the characteristic of Sodom and Gomorrah? Homosexuality, sexual immorality, and all that. Now, some people try to say that this is talking about what it's going to be just before the Lord returns at the end of the tribulation, but it's not, because look at what he says there. He says they're buying, they're eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building, they're marrying, they're giving in marriage, they're doing all the stuff that life encompasses, which we see happening right now. The end of the tribulation, people will be barely hanging on. The world's about to be destroyed completely. People are not going on like life is normal. When the flood came, everybody's telling Noah, yeah, right, yeah, where's this rain coming from? Yeah, like something's going to happen for over 100 years.
Is it true? I heard over the years being taught that there was no rain before the flood.
The Bible says that the earth was watered with a mist and a dew. Basically, it came up from the ground. So indication is there was not rain like we know today. Maybe humidity, mist, fog, dew, that type of stuff. But at any rate, they said, well, everything's happening like it always has. What are you talking about? And then all of a sudden the rain came. Boom, and the flood came. Same thing with Lot. Lot was there. Everything was going on normal in Sodom and Gomorrah. There was no any forewarnings, except the angels showed up and said, listen, you got to get out of here. God's going to destroy the city. And so he tries to warn people. And they're like, you're crazy. Nothing's going to happen. So everything is basically normal. So this is not the equivalent of the end of the tribulation. This has to do with the catching away of the believers before the tribulation starts. And right now, what are we doing? We're telling people terrible things are going to come on this earth. There's going to be a global economy. There's going to be a global religion. There's going to be a global government. You're going to own nothing and like it. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the globalists. and all this stuff is going to take place, and people are going, I would maintain that's what the description of today is. Violence, wickedness, everybody does that which is right in their own eyes. No respect for God's people, sexual immorality, homosexuality, things that probably Sodom and Gomorrah didn't even conceive of. And
same-sex marriage.
at least not that we know of. And yeah, exactly. And the transgenderism and all this nonsense. That's where we're at today. And Jesus said that's what would be the characteristic of the time in which the Lord catches us out of here.
Well, scoffing is another characteristic.
Yeah, 2 Peter. Scoffers in 2 Peter 3 said, where's the, just like it has been.
So they're mocking.
Yeah. Even a lot of churches don't even believe this today.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
We have Christians that they're clueless.
Yeah, this is nothing. It's not even worth wasting time on.
Taking it serious, you know.
So it's a description. So I look at this Resolution 8404 as being a sign of the times, because this
closer.
yeah, this is clearly enshrining into federal regulation and law the days of Lot officially in the United States. Obergefell was the first step, but now that you're codifying it in the law and saying people can be sued if they don't believe that, because what this also does, it also attacks your freedom of belief. You're not allowed to hold those thoughts because our society said that those are unhealthy, unsafe thoughts. Somebody from, I don't know which which media outlet it was. What do you got there?
America's worse than Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. But some media out, a reporter asked the secretary what they were going to do to rein Twitter in for, because Twitter is going to have too much free speech. So, think about this. The media in our country has the role that they have because we have free speech in the Constitution. Do to rein in free speech in a private company. I listened to this one guy. He's not the press secretary, but he's like director of communications or assistant director of communications in the White House. And he was asked by one of the reporters on Fox. I don't know what her name was offhand, but she said, why is Apple eliminating this app, restricting the use of this app in China that the protesters in China are using to communicate? Because if you don't know it, there's huge protests going on all because the Chinese government is welding people into their. They get a case of COVID in the building, they literally weld the building shut with the people inside. People are starving and dying of dehydration and everything else in these buildings. Nobody's allowed in or out. So protests are going all over the country. There's some app on Apple phones that they were using to communicate where they were going to meet up and do these things. The Chinese asked Apple to restrict the use of that app in China so that people couldn't communicate. The current White House, knowing that this is happening, said, we're going to investigate and keep an eye on Twitter because Twitter is going to allow speech that we don't necessarily condone. And she said, why are you and not Apple? And the guy says, well, Apple's a private company and we're afraid of foreign influence on Twitter because some Saudi company investment fund has bought Twitter, and we're afraid of foreign influence on free speech. And she said, but China is a foreign entity who is influencing. Apple's a private company. They can do whatever they want, whether it's right or wrong. They do what they want. Influenced by a foreign government. But Apple is being influenced by a foreign government. Oh, that's not the
Private company.
Isn't Twitter a private company?
Yeah, and so's Apple. And the influence on Twitter that they're citing is an investment fund. An investment fund. If all of us put $10 in a pot back there, so he's the one standing, and we elected to invest that for us. And whatever Neil invests that in, we get a % of the profits. We don't know what Neil invested in. It's called, crypto. But it's called a mutual fund, right? I mean, a lot of people mutual funds, your pension plans. If you have a pension plan, be invested in mutual funds. You don't know what it's in. This is essentially a mutual fund based out of Saudi Arabia, and just like mutual funds countries are invested in all kinds of companies. They buy up stock. Makes a profit, they make a profit. That's what it is. That's what their great concern is. Apple is a country or a company directly influenced by a country who is saying, we don't want you to allow them to use this app. We want you to restrict their speech in China. You remember where your phones, and of course, the real reason is China benefit and Apple can't be investigated because that would probably restrict and reduce the 10% that goes to the big guy. But that's a whole nother area, right? But Twitter might allow somebody to say something that the current administration doesn't like. And so that's So we live in a time when they are diligently to eventually ban what we're now is independent of using social media or Facebook. Anybody remember what people used to do before the internet was ever invented? Well, no, when you read a newspaper, you read books, but you would go to meetings, right? You would go to meetings and people would say, you can buy a cassette tape of the meeting and what was talked about and make copies of this tape and pass them out to your friends. Anybody ever remember doing that? Somebody would say, oh, you got to listen to this tape I got. I went to this, yeah, you went to church and you passed out, you gave people a tape. And it could be a CD or a flash drive or something today. But whatever the case is, you got a copy and you personally gave it because you didn't have social media. You didn't have the internet. Give it to somebody. And we did that. Well, now we do it through the internet. What the major tech companies are doing. Google just came out and they're instituting a new program designed to restrict and correct the flow of misinformation online. Well, what does correct mean? Anybody use Google Documents? Well, you know, your Google document, we looked at it and even though you wrote this, we didn't think that it was correct, so we changed it for you. It's been changed. Anybody remember a book called 1984?
Yes. We had to read it.
What did the main character's, what was the main character's job in the Ministry of Information? Going through records and correcting them and changing. Google has a big thing online, not just Google Documents, Google Docs, but Google Books. They're scanning books all over the world. They're getting these books and they're scanning them in. So how many people possess a copy of the Magna Carta themselves? I don't, but if I want to read it, what would I do? I would, in the past, I would go to the library and look up in an encyclopedia book or something, but I'd go online. Oh, here it is. How do I know they didn't change part of it?
You can get it electronically at the library.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying right now, I would go online right now. This very moment, I could go online. There it is. There, read it. But how do I know they didn't change it? And I learned a couple weeks ago, the major Bible publishers in this, Tyndale, all them, are no longer going to be producing printed Bibles. All of the Bibles are all going to be online. You're not going to be able to buy a hardbound Bible or one you can physically hold in your hands. This is where we need these church ministries that are printing Bibles because they're cracking down. They're trying to take away our First Amendment rights. And if you carefully read the First Amendment, it's one sentence. The main subject matter of the first sentence is freedom of religion. Because if they can tell you what you can believe or can't believe, which is what this bill does, they can tell you what you can say. If you don't have freedom of religion, you don't have freedom of speech. How dare you imply that this marriage is any less than this marriage? How dare you say that this person who claims they're a woman isn't really a woman? How dare,
This is the only way.
how dare you? Anything that they don't want. When they tell you what you can or cannot believe, they can tell you what you can or cannot say. And if they can tell you what you can or cannot say, they can tell you what you can or cannot print or publish.
Right.
And if they can tell you what you can or cannot print or publish, they can also say meetings like this, we're promoting disinformation, hate speech. You know, we stopped you online, but you know, we've got to eradicate hate speech and disinformation. You can't meet like this anymore. This is an illegal meeting. Restrict what you can or can't believe. They can you can or can't say, what you can or cannot publish, and what you can or cannot do in a meeting.
We're going back to the first century when
Exactly, for fear of the Jews, meaning the rulers. So, and the other part of the First Amendment is redress of grievances. So you go to the government and say, listen, my First Amendment right to redress, no standing, no right, no redress. One vote, we still have the Second Amendment. A lot of people don't realize this. There was a decision during the Biden or the Obama administration where the Supreme Court by a 5-4 decision held that the Second Amendment applies to the citizens of the United States. The other 4 justices, some of whom are still there, held that the Amendment only applied to the military and the police of the United States. Hillary Clinton, when running for president, said that decision was decided wrongly. Do you think they automatic, like a bump stock, only it's your hand? So therefore, the only gun that you can have is one where you shoot it, open it up, and reload it, close it, shoot it, open it up. Meanwhile, the criminal that has the best guns that the black market can supply, to say the Second Amendment, the Roe decision, and said the Dred Scott decision, need to stack a few more people into the courts out there as they can right now. So they get a court decision and they decide that, you know what, that decision was wrong. The Second Amendment only applies to the police and the military. All of you people got to turn in your guns. What do you think will happen in this country? You know?
Civil War.
Exactly. And you got Biden comes on and says it's common sense. There's no reason anybody should have a double action, or a semi-automatic weapon. Now you got to turn them all in. Yeah, Max. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Last week I came across an interesting court case, and it was so, one of the craziest court cases I've ever read. I had to go on the Supreme.gov website, supremecourt.gov website, to see if it was real. And it's a case out of the 10th Circuit Court called Brunson versus Adams.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Doesn't sound familiar.
But it's the removal of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and 380 members of Congress for treason and an act of war and fraud.
Now, was the court case saying that was essentially saying they should be removed?
Should be removed.
And was it upheld by the 10th Circuit or not?
I believe so.
That's interesting.
You
You know?
look it up and call versus Adams.
Yeah, because
It's a real court case.
yeah, like Trump or not, one of the best things that happened in the Trump administration was the judges.
Yes.
And I'm not a big fan of McConnell, but the best thing that McConnell has done in his political career has to do with the courts, because it was McConnell that kept Merrick Garland from being on the court. And look what a joke he has been as the Attorney General. Can you imagine if that man had been on the Supreme Court? And it's McConnell. I mean, for all, and there's a lot. He did do well on. And Donald Trump put more people on the courts than any other president in history, and he has affected the courts, and that effect is being felt. That's why the Roe decision was overturned. That's why the Dobbs decision came down. It's because of judges and justices that Donald Trump put on the courts. This is why they're talking about stacking the courts, because if that bill comes, what way will it go? Right now, we might look at it and think we have an advantage. We may not. It's about anybody's guess when it comes to that.
You should, I read
Yeah.
through all of it.
Yeah, what I'm going to look it up here again too.
There is a list this long, of all the Congress on this thing.
And there should
How
be.
recently was this?
This was filed in November of 2020,
Wow.
right after the election.
Yeah, what was the name of it again?
Brunson versus Adams.
gonna hear it.
I don't know.
Well, that's another case. Yeah, here it is, the 10th Circuit Court. And that's the problem. Sometimes these things don't get to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And they don't get noticed, and they only affect a small part of the country. And but these reasons why the Biden administration or regime is packing the courts as fast as they can. And also one of the reasons they want to expand the Supreme Court, because they want to do away with the slight conservative edge that we have there. So this is where we need to pray for our country. But again, and I sometimes feel bad, you know, I go to a number of conservative events, and we look at what these things that we're doing, and we look at and do pray for the people who are going down to Columbus tomorrow to protest that Holly drag city.
Why don't you lead us in prayer before we?
Yeah, we'll do that. That'd be good. But what I was going to say is, I feel kind of guilty sometimes because, you know, I've read the rest of the book, you know, meaning the Bible, and I know how it turns out, but I also know what we'll go through before we get to the end. And the United States, I'm convinced from studying the Bible, is eventually going to have to decline, because the United States. So something has to happen. Globalists still look at the United States as one of the biggest obstacles to world government. And I had written an article on it. It's in one of these, some of our older newsletters back there, but it was an article on Donald Trump about how, you know, why they hated him so much, because he was the impediment. But people like us, and they put the United Nations in New York in order to get America involved in it, because the League of Nations, which was over in Europe, America would not get involved in. And God stopped us from that happening because what was his name? President Wilson had that stroke when he was trying to people. Mhm.
Economically and militarily.
Yeah.
And financially.
Yep. And in talking about militarily, the Pentagon right now is concerned about the number of young men in this country who are physically able to serve in the military. They're having a problem with that. And there's several reasons for it. If you go by the average high school, half of the teenage boys are skinnier than the girls. You know, I mean, I'm not saying they all have to be out lifting weights, but there's a problem when the average is skinnier and less fit than the average teenage girl. That's a problem, because when they get out of school and they go into the military and they can't pass basic physical fitness requirements, it's hard to put people in the military. Here's another thing. Fentanyl, which is pouring into our country through the open border, which I still maintain is by design. China is systematically killing off, because the number one killer of young military-aged men in this country is fentanyl. China is killing our young men. Fentanyl supplied through the open border, and the Biden administration is complicit in it because the big man's getting 10%. So that's why they don't close the border. This is part of it. The transgender thing. Transgenders aren't suitable in the military. They won't let a person in that has asthma. I had a friend of mine I graduated with. He tried to go in the Navy, and he had problems marching because he had a problem with his foot, and his feet got sore marching. And they gave him a medical discharge from basic training. He said, "Hey, I'm in the Navy. I'm not going to be marching around all the time." They said, "No, physical requirements." We gave him a medical discharge. He was disappointed. That was back in the early 80s. Now, these young men can't pass the physical fitness test, and transgender can't be in because they're on drugs. They can't be deployed on the battlefront. An asthma person, if somebody has asthma, they wouldn't take them because Well, you need drugs and everything. You have breathing problems. We can't deploy you on the back. But they want to put transgendered into the military and supply them with all these drugs, and they're not deployable. They're systematically destroying the military. They're destroying the churches, and they have been destroying the churches. So many churches will never talk about this. And they may be doctrinally sound, but they'll never talk about this. Let's just all tell about how much we love Jesus and forget the rest of the world. And anybody that thinks that there's a spiritual war going on out there trying to destroy us is they've taken their eyes off from Jesus. Conspiracy theory. Yeah, tinfoil.
We reduced our oil reserves, we've given all our military equipment to.
Yeah.
I mean, we're.
All of our munitions and ordnance, we've sent it out. We've depleted the oil reserve.
Well, it's a demise of America that's been in the planning for years and years.
And I still maintain the reason Trump was so hated was because Hillary was supposed to pick up where Biden or where Obama left off. And everything we see happening now was supposed to happen when she became president with no break. We would have been in the global government already. But God intervened and gave us a last hurrah with Trump. Love him or hate him, God used him to put the brakes on this whole globalist thing. We would be there today if it weren't for that. And now the Biden administration is picking up and trying to accelerate us. The globalists are becoming very open now. Before, they at least had a semblance of cover, but now they're out very open saying, our plans are coming together. We're going to have a global government here very shortly. And I know we're getting about 9:00. One last thing, the monetary system, Bitcoin, the people who develop Bitcoin, which is private, are dying. They're having mysterious accidents and things, and they're dying. Bitcoin is the biggest challenge to what's called the central bank digital currencies, which are now coming out. The United States is phasing a test thing in that's supposed to be this month. A number of major financial corporations, Wells Fargo and Citibank, these big banking institutions are doing test projects with global currencies or digital currencies right now.
Wow.
The biggest threat to the central bank digital currency is things like Bitcoin and these private ones. And now the people who are behind that are dying.
We have a bank in Wadsworth, PNC Bank.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer manned by humans. There's no human whatsoever in the bank. You can go into the bank and use their machines, but there's no human there.
Interesting.
Like you said, we're in the last hours.
Yeah. And when the money is digital,
It's all digital.
Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum that's pushing all this, said we need to pattern it like China has. And in China right now, well, you're not going to be able to get that plane ticket to travel over there because we don't think that you deserve to go there.
That's why I think COVID was a huge test to show the herd mentality of
I still think it came out about 6 months earlier than what they wanted, but they rallied and they still used it. And Australia, there's places, you can't gas your car up today because you've used too much gas this week.
The G20 summit they're just doing, it's about 20 nations determining, we may see the result here very shortly, where you cannot travel internationally without COVID vaccination papers.
And if all of your money is digital and no longer allowed to use any hard currency of any kind, then they control your money.
Absolutely.
And you might think you have money in the bank, but it can be depleted or just locked up and you don't have access to it.
Exactly right.
So anyway, we need to pray for our country, but like I said, we look and see what the Bible says and we know what's coming.
Time for rejoicing for us, really.
Well, that's what Jesus said. And one last thing, while we're there in Luke chapter 17, look in Luke, and I keep coming back to this over and over. Luke chapter 21, Jesus said in verse 23, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your head, for your redemption draweth
There
nigh.
you go.
We shouldn't be overwhelmed. You know, the tide's coming in against us. We're sandbagging and trying to preserve what we can as long as we can. But we know that our redemption draweth nigh. We're going to be caught up to be with the Lord. Then the events of the tribulation will take place. And after that, we return to the earth with him. The millennial reign of Christ takes place. And that's what we're looking forward to. But right now, we're trying to reach as many people as we can with the gospel and encourage people and not be overwhelmed. The enemy wants us to be overwhelmed, overcome with anxiety and fear. But God's not given us a spirit of fear, has he?
No.
We are supposed to look up because our redemption draweth nigh. All right, final thought or whatever, we'll go ahead and close in prayer. So, all right, let's pray.
Pray for tomorrow.
And pray for, what's that? Yeah, for tomorrow. All right. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you again that we could spend some time. We thank you we still have the freedom to do what we're doing. We know that we may be on borrowed time with these things. Thank you that we can still get some things out online. And again, we recognize probably on borrowed time there as well, Lord. But certainly when we look at it in light of what the Bible has to say. Yes, there's some difficult things coming upon this world, but eventually it's going to give way to the millennial reign of Christ. And we look so forward to that time where we'll be able to be here with you as Christ rules and reigns over this earth. The devil is locked into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. Father, what a wonderful time that will be. But in the meanwhile, help us not be overcome with anxiety or fear. Help us, Lord, to do the work you've given us to do. You put us here at this time for a reason. Help us to be found faithful, standing up for your word, being a witness and a testimony for you, warning people of what's coming so that they too can be caught up to meet you in the air when that trumpet is sounded. Lord, also we pray that we continue to make a difference, that we would continue to push back as you give us opportunity. Lord, pray for the people that will be down in Columbus tomorrow, voicing a protest against the Holly Drag story time that this Unitarian Universalist group is going to put on. And we just pray that you would help them to have an opportunity to be a witness and a testimony for you, that you might bring some people on the opposing side around to consider the claims of the gospel, Lord, as a result of this. And at the same time, we also pray a hedge of protection around about those that'll be there. We know that there's outside agitators that are planning on being there. We know that there are people intent on causing problems and making people such as our people look bad. We just pray that you'd protect our people, give them wisdom, give them protection, guide and direct them, and help them to be a witness and a testimony for you, even as they protest against this abomination that's taking place in this church down in Columbus. And again, we just thank you for the opportunity we have to serve, and we just pray your blessing now. Watch over us as we leave here tonight. Keep us safe on the roads, and we just pray your blessing now on the day tomorrow as well as on Sunday. Use us for your glory, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. Well, from ravens to tribulation, we covered everything. We should turn a faucet on and see if there's any water coming back.
I just looked online, there's nothing on there saying.
Don't
Okay.
eat too many cricket crackers.
Yeah, rice flour. Maybe it's rice processed by cricket.
Well, remember when we were younger, they used to have delicacy
Carlo,
chocolate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't have any problem with them doing it if people want to do it by
I had a
choice.
friend of mine, we were fishing and we were catching grasshoppers,
Uh-huh.
and somebody bet him on a dare, you're gonna eat the grasshopper.
You're gonna lock it all the way.
And there's really nothing wrong with it,
You get sick.
but it's when it's forced, and you're told you have to. That's the problem.
You remember when we were kids, Al? There was grasshoppers everywhere in Richfield.
Oh, we used to catch grasshoppers. We used to go to the pond and throw them in just to watch the fish eat them.
I don't hardly see grasshoppers.
You made a good point. I don't remember seeing much in the terms of grasshoppers this summer at all.
And I remember all the fireflies at
And-
night. You very
Oh.
seldom never see fireflies.
That we saw a few, but you know what else you don't see, that didn't see this year? Those big grasshoppers that are about like this long that would be in the driveway. Remember, they'd always be in the drive. You walk down the drive
I don't know.
and they were like colored like the dirt and they just take off.
I think it's all part of the new times that things are disappearing. I mean, spring doesn't.
Either that or Klaus Schwab's out there
When we were
collecting them for
kids, you
snacks.
could smell spring in the air.
Mhm.
You could, now it's just like, where's the smell? It's not even there anymore, you know? Well, it's all gonna get restored.
Yeah.
And that's another thing we have to look forward to. The Lord's not only restoring us, he's gonna
Mhm.
restore this beautiful planet that he created.
And there will be a lot of restoration taking place during the,
And there's gonna be a lot
Millennial
of,
reign.
sadly, there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna have regrets for eternity because they missed it.
Mhm. Did you get a copy of this?
Oh, what's that? Yes, I did. You sent me one though.
Yeah.
don't
I usually
think
send
got
it
the
to you.
latest
This one just came out.
But that, your daughter gave me one, so I got it in my Bible.
Okay. All right, then I'll not send it to you this time.
You don't have to send it, I got a copy.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'll
great,
save the
great,
stamp on
great
that.
night.
Good to see you.
God bless.
See ya.
Yeah, I'm trying to get over more, so.
How's your wife doing?
She's doing well, yeah, so. We just been kind of busy. I was fighting the battle with, a sinus, I thought it was a sinus infection, but it was my tooth.
Oh,
I had a root
okay.
canal go bad,
Oh, yeah.
and it went into my neck. I couldn't move my neck. It went into my ear.
Mhm.
I had all this pressure. It felt like I had weighed 200 pounds.
Wow.
That's actually the max
I went to Gary Dominic and he tried to do an adjustment. I just went through the ceiling. He said, I can't adjust you. He said, you got something else going on.
Yeah.
Well, here they found the root canal
It infected and
infected. It was a
backed up
20-year-old.
into. Oh,
So
my.
they had to take the root canal out. I was at the oral surgeon the other day, so it's only been out 2 days. And then my son, I called my son because it happened over Thanksgiving too, but it was building even before that. And he said, I'm not gonna fool with it because you got a week to see the dentist. I'm gonna put you on antibiotics. So he got me a prescription. We went down to Colonial Pharmacy and got it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I'm
How you
on the
feel
mend,
now?
so, no, I'm feeling good. Yeah.
Because usually once it's out, I remember I had an abscess tooth. And I
Well,
was
most
in
of it's
such pain.
cleared up, but I still
Yeah.
got a little bit of.
Yeah,
block.
because well, it gets up in there.
I
It
was
has to
talking
work
to
out.
Kim, she just says, take just warm water with your
Oh, okay,
syringe.
yeah. Yeah.
Start flushing.
One week from tomorrow.
But I remember once that tooth came out,
Alright.
oh, did it hurt? But once it came out, it was like instant relief.
Well, I only got
Pressure
one
was
tooth
gone.
left, so I got an upper
Okay.
and a lower.
Mhm.
I've
I
got
don't wear it
the,
all the time, but I do wear it, but I
I've
couldn't
got
wear it all
plenty of
last week
the,
because the pain around the
plums.
gum
I
was so
think I still have one of
intense.
the.
Now, there's
Mhm.
no nerve left in that too.
Mhm.
What it did was it reddened and inflamed the gum, so the
Mm.
infection was trapped in there.
The Christmas tree up.
And you
Come
know,
over
that's
here.
bad
Christmas
news.
tree
My
is
son
up.
said
Yeah.
infections in your head are bad.
Oh, yeah.
You can get serious, people have died from it.
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
So,
Yeah. So, well, I'm glad glad they figured out
I'll
what was on
definitely
that.
come
Yeah.
back one Friday before Christmas, because I always like to give you a little something
Yeah.
at Christmas time.
Well, and Christmas Eve, we're having our Christmas Eve candlelight service here. So
Okay,
what we'll do, it'll be 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve, 7 o'clock. Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll sing some Christmas songs,
Oh, yeah.
and then what we do at the after we sing some songs, I read the birth of Christ according to the scriptures.
Yeah, I was at one of your
Yeah.
Christmas vigils.
Okay, yeah, and then we just light the
And then we all
candles
go
and
around
share
everybody gives
some
a-
blessings and
shares
things
a
of the year.
testimony. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we just stand around and then sing "Oh Silent Night" or something like that, and then conclude, and
Did your
then
water go?
no, not yet. I don't think.
Well, you know what? Knowing the city of Cleveland Water Department, it's like, you
Yeah.
gotta do a lot of praying.
Yeah, I know. Well, a lot of people who are having problems, but somebody went over here to the Shell station and they said that their water is on.
That's kind of strange, because if it's a main line coming down from.
Well, they might be on a different line though,
But you know what,
because
that's a brand new valley part.
Yeah.
I wonder if that is.
well, and their line may come off from this area over here, where our line might come down over here. So it's hard to say where the line comes in.
Yeah, it is hard to say, yeah.
But
But no, I figured, because I missed you, I didn't know if you were talking about it today, about that, this, law that they want to do.
that's why I had these in my
So
bag here, because I had them on the
so that's why I
radio.
brought it up tonight, because I was kind of following it earlier in the week. And I knew I was listening about Mike Lee, that Mike Lee, they were trying to get Mike Lee's amended bill in, but Kim said that failed.
Yeah, what happened was a supermajority, 60 votes or more to pass the Lee amendment. And they didn't get it. They needed a simple majority to pass the Langford amendment or the Rubio amendment. And they
Yeah,
are 51 votes.
well, you know, it's interesting,
And,
Pastor, but you know, it's like, I haven't been listening to Sanders too much anymore.
Mhm.
Usually I'm going to bed pretty early, but
And
I did catch him one day, not too long ago. And I was surprised how he was saying too, you know, normally he's all gung ho about, you know, oh, get out and support these conservatives and Republicans, you know. And, you know, and that's been his theme, you know, let's stay strong, keep that, you know.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you what, he almost came across in so many words and said that he feels we're so close that it's almost like we're losing. He said he feels so betrayed by a lot of people he supported that
Mhm.
when they got to Washington, they went the other way on us.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
It's easy to feel that way. And I think that's part of the devil's attack,
Yeah,
to overwhelm us so much that we give up.
yeah, but we gotta keep fighting. Right.
Mhm.
Yep, you're right.
And that's why,
Like my brother used to say, he used to tell me, Tommy, one day at a time.
exactly,
One day at a time and pray. Get up, pray.
when we met up there where the cement place is now, next to the family restaurant,
Yeah, right.
we had a guy that lived, I don't know if you ever knew him, Frank Van Den Eyden, an older guy. He lived down Farnham Road.
I'm not sure.
He was a big old guy, tall, he had huge hands. And one day went down there, he was in his 80s, and he was looking for his water, or his, not water line, his sewer line from the house to the septic tank.
Okay.
He had dug a trench like about 8 feet across his lawn, you know, digging, looking for this. He just was going
kinda
across.
willy-nilly digging?
Well, no, he was kind of going crossways because he figured the house comes out here and the house is here and the septic tank is here. So the line's got to be in here somewhere. So he just went down and started digging crossways, figured he'd hit it eventually. So we saw him and said,
water yet?
why didn't you call us? He goes, I did the same way I eat my meal, just a bite at a time. But you know, it's like the old joke, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time.
Yeah, right.
You know, his point was,
Yeah.
I go out, I dig a little, I get tired, I go in, have something to drink, maybe watch television a little bit. I go out later on and I see you, Dad.
You know, the thought occurred to me.
And then he just go out and work until he just, you know, he just took his time, bite at a time. But it's a good philosophy.
It is. In other words, well, it's like, you know, it's the old saying too, don't put the cart before the horse. you
Yeah.
know? It's like, you gotta take life and deal with it as it comes.
Mhm.
And yeah, we can plan and make plans, but you know what?
Mhm.
I always believed, you know, what a lot of good ministers have said over the years, you know, we have to, the old Christians used to say, I'm gonna do this, God willing,
God willing, yeah.
Look at it.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I keep coming back to that thing in Luke 21. I got onto that Luke 21 about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what exactly caused it. And I started talking about how you look up and it's kind of hard to be frowning when you're looking up.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
And,
exactly.
and I remember talking about that, but I have kept coming back to that over and over and over. And the worse things get, the more that has become almost like a theme verse. I see these people turn against us like Ernst and Blunt, who were on our side,
It's a shame.
and they turned against us. And I keep looking up,
Well,
because your redemption draweth nigh.
it's something we
And-
talked about a few times in the past, that not everybody that's conservative or even does things we really like is a
Mhm.
Christian.
Yeah,
Oh, no, that's.
exactly.
That's
And
totally-
so we just,
No, I won't throw your stuff.
But
away.
you know what, the thought occurred to me, we were
Are you
talking
heading out
about
soon?
We could do it together.
the end times and stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, if it's this close, and I believe it is too,
You know, you can
think
look
of
at.
1 billion people on the earth.
8
now?
billion now, yeah, they say.
I think they said they crossed that threshold this year, 8
Uh-huh.
billion.
Yeah, just the last week or so.
So out of
Do
that,
not sold
the math.
several
We
houses.
eliminate
I
those
moved on
Christians
more
who
than
really
one
are
occasion.
born again,
Do not do that.
who are gonna go
That
in the
was my
rapture.
Let's be
Then we
generous. Let's
eliminate-
be generous and say 10%.
Then
But we
then we eliminate
So-
those people who are
and-
gonna
yeah.
die during the
But we didn't
Yeah,
tribulation.
take care, Steve. But I was gonna say, if you start with the 8 million and be generous and say 10%, that would be like 800,000. So let's round it up to a
Pay
million.
somebody.
So, I mean, a bit, or
8
8
billion,
8
no,
billion.
8 billion
Yeah.
would be how many?
It would be 80 or 10% would be 800 million. That's right. So, I mean, even if we rounded it up to a billion,
Worldwide.
it's still 7 billion people.
Yeah, right.
And then if you said another billion people that died directly as a result of that taking place,
A vast majority
6
of
billion.
people walking around on this earth
Uh-huh.
right now
And then come back.
have the potential, if they survive it all
Uh-huh.
and are saved during the tribulation,
Mhm.
will go into 1,000-year reign and possibly live 1,000 years before they're faced with the final,
Yeah, and they'll be like we are today,
which is incredible.
you know. And but here's the thing: if you think about it, the Bible indicates that 2/3. Take care. We'll see you.
I don't know, I was thinking.
The Bible indicates that
I don't know
only
which one to do with grade
only a
twelve.
third of the Jewish people will survive the
No,
tribulation.
because the millennial
And-
kingdom,
yeah.
there's going to be marriage, and there's
Mhm.
going to God's going
Yeah.
to be expecting people to
Oh
replenish
yeah, and that would be the
right?
people who survived the earth. But I was going to use the Jewish people as an index. If you take that 2/3 and let's just apply it,
Yeah.
across the board to the number of people that go into the tribulation, that 2/3 of them are going to die, and only a third will make it.
They cleared out fast, everybody has to go pee.
I'll see it. All right, I will close things up.
Yeah, I gotta let you
And,
get going here.
But yeah, I mean, but you think of that,
Okay.
Oh, I know.
2/3
I think about a
of, let's
lot
say
of
the
stuff.
7 billion, we start with 7 billion, only 2/3 of them survive. You know, if you round it to 6 billion, it was easier.
Well, I
If you
was
round it to 6 billion,
I was talking to my wife and my daughter the other day, and I was bringing up things that a lot of people don't think about. I think about what's eternity going to be like, and then
Oh, yeah.
what about things the Bible doesn't tell us about?
oh
Like,
yeah.
okay, I think we're going to be able to eat. Jesus ate his
Mhm.
new body,
There's a marriage supper of the Lamb,
but I don't think we're going to have to eat to
No.
live.
and you're not going to have to worry like this as much.
But
And
I
you're not
love
have
to
to worry
take
about-
naps. Are we
and you're
still
not-
going to be able to take a nap?
Maybe, and maybe you don't need it, and you're not going to have to worry about gluten problems and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I've
You
had
know,
my
I
share.
mean, it'll be nice to be able to just basically eat.
That's why I was
and,
kidding the dentist the other day
yeah.
too, and she said, "Well, you only got 12 teeth left." I said, "Yeah, I got enough for a partial." I says,
let me interrupt just a second. Kim, do you want me to take the coffee pot home? Okay, is there anything you need me to do before I leave?
The coffee pot, and then, I turned off the coffee pot here and poured that coffee in here.
Okay,
"So yeah,
all right.
And I don't know what happened, our water's in here, so you might wanna grab one of them.
Okay, I will do that then.
But it was kind of funny because it was like he's saying, well, we can do implants and stuff like that, and maybe get you better dentures with implants. And I said, I honestly, I'm not going to need it. I said, the dentures I have right now are fine. They're going to add a tooth on for the one they took out. But I said, actually, when the Lord comes back, I'm getting a whole new set of teeth.
Yeah, and they're going to be permanent.
He just looked at me.
And they're going to be permanent.
So I said,
Permanent,
I'm almost 70
permanent.
years old. I'm not too worried about the teeth. That's the least of my problem.
I know. I think of that too. I just like, okay, probably in the not too distant future, we're
So what
gonna,
do we start
we'll
off
be-
with 32
yeah.
teeth?
we're gonna be uploaded to the cloud, and we'll be the improved 7.0 version.
Well, it's gonna be on anything we can imagine.
Oh, I know. Well, that's what the Bible says. I have not seen,
or
hear,
ear heard,
neither
the things
entered into
which
the
God
heart
has
of man.
prepared for those who love him.
Oh, I just, and the thing of it is, when you think about it, I can think and imagine the millennial kingdom
Right.
because it's a finite period of time.
like
I
to
can
think
look at
about
that.
it. Yeah, me too.
Now, when you start to think about eternity, that's where you really,
Well,
stretches
and I
the
think
mind.
There's a lot of Christians
Because-
that don't realize, because look at the churches, like
We'll see you guys later.
the Catholic Church and a lot of other churches, they don't teach the millennial
No.
kingdom.
No,
It's just like the return of Christ, boom, the kingdom. They
Yeah.
miss the millennial kingdom and this preceding event that's going to take place before there's a new heavens and a new earth. So it's
And there's so
incredible.
much that they're missing. And even churches that believe what we believe don't
Well, I've
talk
been able
about
to
it.
share with other Catholics, and they say, "Where do you learn all this?" I said, "I don't learn it in the Catholic Church."
In the Bible, that's where, in the Bible.
But I said I was blessed enough to be born in a family where my dad was he was a Protestant believer, and then I had friends like yourself and other people that were good friends, and I said I always kept an open mind,
Uh-huh.
and I always figured if Jesus is born again in your heart, you're a Christian. And church is important, but it's secondary.
It's not the church that
spiritual
saves you.
birth is what
It's the
saves
God.
us.
Exactly. Excuse
So
me.
God bless.
All right, take care of that.
Don't forget your tax.
Oh, somebody's
Outside the
yakking
water.
here. Is this yours, Tom? Tom?
No, everything is fine.
Tom.
Your tax.
Yakking here.
Oh, boy, I need that.
You need that going out.
Got things to do.
Okay, Pastor, have a good night.
I'll get the place locked up, so, let's see here what I got here.
Yeah, we're supposed to get another crazy weather coming in.
Yeah.
30 to 50 mile an hour
Oh,
winds.
and cold weather tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
Tomorrow it's supposed to start dropping, and then,
We're going out to Medina tomorrow with the family, so I like to walk around shop Medina a little bit.
oh, yeah, well, yeah, you might wanna bundle up.
Yeah.
It may drop.
Yeah.
Later. Take care of that. Good to see you.
You do.
Yeah, got a few of these left behind, so I guess I'll stack them together. Well, how's little Sadie doing? I haven't seen her for a while.
She's okay. She's doing all right. She's a good dog. I'm glad I had her.
Oh, good. We got Kim talked into getting a dog now, so I'm
Yeah,
sure
Kim
that,
talked into getting a dog.
yeah,
Oh, boy.
so we're,
That means
looking-
Sadie can come up and visit them.
yeah, we're looking at doing that probably after New Year's, because it would really be hard to introduce a dog in right at this time with everybody coming over and crazy, and
Right.
then we want to go down to Kentucky and all.
Are you
So,
looking for a specific kind of dog?
kind of looking at maybe a lab
Huh.
or lab-like, doesn't necessarily
I'll
have to be
keep
a
my eye
cougar.
out for the rescue.
Um,
Are you getting a puppy?
Well, yeah, that's what they would like to get. That way it can grow up with the cats and the chickens and everything. And make it easier for the cats to get used to it. Lauren got a really good picture, a couple good pictures of a rabbit with the Christmas tree.
Oh,
And one of the cats, I think it was Ace, reaching up, sniffing the nose, nose to nose practically with the rabbit.
that's
so-
cute.
But we figure we will wait until we come back up from Kentucky. Also, somebody that Kim works with was saying that after Christmas in January, you get a lot of puppies.
That weren't born in time for Christmas.
Well, no, they were
Nobody
given as
wanted
Christmas
them.
presents, but then people decided it was too much work.
Yeah, that's true.
And so they get rid of them. The novelty has worn off. They chewed up one too many slippers, made one too many messes, and so out the dog goes. And
I could see that.
so they said that would be the best time to look, because right now everybody's trying to get them before Christmas,
Right.
but then people will be, getting rid of them, unfortunately. So that's the thought. Well,
Who's gonna break down for you?
I'll work on this. We'll work on the rest of this. We're not going to worry about this tonight because there's no water or anything. We'll probably come by tomorrow or something.
Okay.
Thanks, Pastor, Al, for everything.
Oh, you guys take care.
Okay.
I'll see you guys later on. Be careful going out there. All right, we'll see. I'm going to lock that door since I'm the only one in here. So. Oh, man. I look here and I was thinking, I might at least put some of these tables away, even if I don't take all the chairs